Are you new to video games? Or maybe you play mobile games already, but you're curious about popular game consoles from Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, and so on? Do you struggle with platforming games and want to understand them better? Whatever your reason, thank you for being here. The goal of this video is to teach you about how to use a typical gamepad or controller to play video games. To help illustrate how everything works, we'll be looking at Super Mario World, a popular 2D platformer game made by Nintendo way back in the 1990s. Throughout this video, I will use the terms gamepad and controller interchangeably, but they mean the same thing: an input device for controlling and performing actions in the video game you are playing. I will also sometimes use the terms console and system to both refer to the device that you use to play video games. If you are ever unclear on any of the terminology, or you still have questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll be happy to help clarify things. With that out of the way, first let's get familiar with the controller, also called a gamepad, and learn the basics of how to use it. Here is a view of a modern gamepad designed for the Nintendo Switch console. This is the front, also called the face of the controller. Different devices for playing video games, usually called systems or consoles, have different layouts, names, and designs for their various buttons on their gamepads, but many will follow a similar theme as what you see here. Even if what you are playing has a different type of controller, the basic principles will remain the same. Let's break down what you are seeing here into common components of a gamepad. First is the control stick or analog stick. Most modern controllers have two of these, a primary one on the left side of the controller and a secondary one on the right side. Older game consoles may have only one or even none at all on their controllers. The left analog stick is primarily used for movement. It is commonly used for navigating menus and controlling your character on the screen as you play. Below that, we have a plus sign shaped set of buttons called directional buttons or a directional pad. This is commonly called a D-pad for short. This is an earlier and more simplified means of controlling movement in many games, with individual buttons corresponding to up, down, left, and right movement for menus and characters. For games that support it, you can also press two adjacent buttons on the D-pad at the same time to move diagonally. The D-pad predates the invention of the analog sticks for controllers, so older games like Super Mario World may require you to use it. Now, some controllers, especially on older video game consoles, do not have analog sticks at all, and the D-pad is the only means of moving the cursor in menus or the character while playing. The right analog stick is less often used, and in fact, many games do not utilize it at all. For ones that do, it commonly may control the direction the camera is facing, or perform other miscellaneous functions or commands unique to each game. Next, we have the face buttons. These are the primary means of performing actions in games. Most modern gamepads have 4 of these buttons, though you may find 6, 3, or even 2, depending on the video game system you are playing. These 4 buttons are almost always arranged in a north, east, south, and west orientation. What each button is named will vary between each video game console manufacturer, but for Nintendo's case, the north button is named X, the east button is named A, the south button is named B, and the west button is named Y. If you are playing a Sony game console, for example, the north face button is triangle, the east is circle, the south is technically named cross, though most just call it X, and the west button is square. Regardless of the labels though, their functions are very similar, and their layout will become second nature to you over time. What they actually do in any given game will vary widely, however. There is usually a button for making a selection in a menu, and a button to cancel a selection or return to a previous menu screen, for example. These are commonly either B or A on a Nintendo controller, but it will vary on a per-game basis. You will need to familiarize yourself with the individual game you want to play in order to understand what its unique control scheme or layout is like. Your controller may also have one or more buttons related to special functions of the console. Most commonly of these are the Start and Select buttons. What they are actually called, however, will vary widely between companies and even individual game consoles. On this Nintendo Switch controller, for example, they are called plus and minus buttons. On other controllers, these buttons may be called something like options, mode, menu, or back buttons. A start button, or plus button in this case, typically performs one of a few different actions, depending on the game. For some common examples, pressing start or plus may either pause the game, bring up a menu, or show an inventory screen. A select button, or a minus button in this case, may also perform a particular set of functions, like bringing up an inventory screen, showing a map screen, or in some cases pulling up a menu. Even if it is called something else, almost every console has at least a start button equivalent, and most have a select button as well, though what exactly they do may vary from game to game. Here we see some other buttons that have functions specific to the Nintendo Switch console. Your controller may have some of these as well, and they perform specific actions related to the console itself, regardless of the game you are playing. The home button, for example, is a way to return to the console's main screen and quit out of a game you are currently playing without turning the console completely off. You can also perform other actions from the console's main screen while still continuing to play a game, and then go back to the game again after you have finished that task. Nintendo Switch also has a screenshot or camera feature with a dedicated button to activate it while you are playing. This allows you to save a picture of whatever is currently shown on the screen as an image to your console, so that you can preserve the moment to enjoy later on, even after you have finished playing. Your console may have similar functions and dedicated buttons for returning to the home screen or taking photos on its controller, or you may have buttons for other features unique to that console, or none of these at all. In addition to the face buttons on the front face of the controller, on the top you will find more buttons, usually a set of 2 pairs on either side. These come in 2 different types: a shoulder button, usually situated in front, and trigger buttons towards the rear. For Nintendo Switch controllers, the shoulder buttons are called L and R for left and right, respectively, and the triggers are likewise called ZL and ZR. Your controller may differ somewhat. The shoulder buttons and triggers may be called something else on other consoles, or your controller may only have 2 shoulder buttons and no triggers, or if you go back far enough in game console history, no buttons on top of the controller at all. Older games, and games with simpler control schemes, may not utilize the shoulder buttons or triggers very much, and some may not use them at all. For example, in Super Mario World, the controller at that time in history only had the 2 shoulder buttons, and even that was a new concept. So while the shoulder buttons are technically utilized in the game to adjust the camera position, it's also a very optional and situational feature to use, and most players go through the entire game without ever doing so. In other words, you probably will not be using the shoulder buttons at all while playing Super Mario World. But for more modern games, they are used very regularly for a variety of different things, which will just depend on the game you are playing. Racing games, for example, will commonly use the triggers for acceleration and brake buttons, and use the face buttons for other functions. For most people, it is often easier to press 2 buttons at the same time when one is a face button and the other is a shoulder button as well, since they typically use 2 different fingers to do that, instead of trying to press multiple face buttons at the same time with just your thumb. And on that note, let's go over the most common way to grip a controller for ease of use. It's worth noting that to play most games successfully, or at least comfortably, you will need to hold the controller with both hands. you will primarily be using your thumbs to control the game, and so you want to hold the controller in your hand so that your thumb rests comfortably where it will most often be positioned. On the left side of the controller, this will be with your thumb resting on the analog stick or D-pad, depending on the game's control method. It is natural and usually comfortable for your index finger and or middle finger to rest on the top of the controller, where the shoulder button and trigger is located. And that is typically how you will press these buttons during play. The remaining fingers can rest behind the controller to help hold it and support it in your hand, with the longer handle part on either side resting in your palm. On the right side, the layout and grip will be similar. Your thumb will mainly need to be positioned on the face buttons, as pressing those will happen very frequently throughout play. Sometimes you may need to reach your thumb over to the right analog stick to use that as well, depending on the game, but that's usually less frequent than using the face buttons. Some game genres and types may be an exception, and it is possible you could play a game where you would use the analog sticks more often and focus on the shoulder and trigger buttons more than the face buttons. But this is less common for the majority of games and will depend on the type of game you are playing. Just like with the left side, on the right side, your index finger and or middle finger can rest atop the controller in easy reach of the shoulder and trigger buttons. For those who have difficulties in this regard or find holding a controller in this way uncomfortable, there are some alternatives. One way that is less common but still utilized by some folks is to hold the controller like usual in your left hand, but use an alternative grip in your right hand, where instead of using your thumb to press the face buttons, you use both your index and middle fingers at the same time, as shown in this image. This has some drawbacks with certain games, as it makes pressing the right shoulder and trigger buttons more difficult, but depending on the game, it may be a more viable approach for certain individuals who prefer this kind of grip. Some consoles and controllers also offer motion controls depending on the game, where you move the controller itself around while holding it in your hands. While button presses are still fairly important, movement by an analog stick or D-pad becomes much less frequent when playing games that fully support motion controls. If this is the only way you can play games in general, you will be most interested in consoles like the Nintendo Wii and accessories like PlayStation Move and Xbox Kinect, and their compatible games. If you need a completely different style of controller to be able to play, you may look into getting an arcade controller for your console instead as another alternative. They tend to be a bit more expensive than the typical controller, but they are designed to sit on a flat surface like a table or a desk while you play, rather than having to grip the controller in your hands. They also have larger buttons that you may find easier to press, and a much bigger analog stick, usually called a joystick, which is designed to be moved with your entire hand, rather than controlling everything with just your thumbs and fingers on a normal gamepad. It's worth noting that not all games support this type of controller, however, so you may be limited in the games you can play with it. So now you have become familiar with the layout of a typical game controller, or gamepad, and the basics of how to use it. Next, let's take a look at how to play Super Mario World, a popular two-dimensional platforming genre game. First, I will just point out that on the sides of the screen, you will notice various icons that show the typical buttons on a controller, including a D-pad and shoulder buttons on the left side, as well as the face buttons on the right. This sort of thing will not normally appear as you are playing a game, but I've included it in this video to help demonstrate what buttons I am pressing while I play. Super Mario World is an older Mario game from the Super Nintendo Entertainment System back in the early 1990s. As such, the Super Nintendo's controller was less complex than a modern one, and so it only had a D-pad for movement and no triggers, only the two buttons on the shoulders, L on the left side and R on the right. Since Super Mario World is a two-dimensional, or 2D game for short, you do not need to worry about moving the character in 3D space. Platforming genre games are named such because they involve you moving a character from one location to another on the screen while jumping or otherwise maneuvering them from platform to platform. When you first begin playing the game, you will be shown the title screen. This is a very common way to offer players a choice of options to choose from before they begin playing, and with many games, it is also a way to make a good first impression. In Super Mario World's case, you are shown a gameplay demonstration to give you hints about how the game works, even without having ever played it before. There's also a visual prompt shown on the title screen in many games that will tell you how to proceed, such as press start, or a similar face button on the controller. If your game is lacking such a prompt, however, it would be very common to use either the start button or one of the face buttons to proceed past the title screen and begin playing the game. Super Mario World does not have such a visual prompt, but as you can see, pressing the B button will bring up the main start menu. Then you are presented with 4 options to choose from: Mario A, Mario B, Mario C, and Erase Data. This is an early form of save files, which is a common thing to find in longer games that were not intended to be completed in a single play session. Save files, as their name suggests, allow you to save your progress you have made, take a break from playing, and come back to the game at a later date or time. To navigate this menu, use the D-pad to move the cursor, and the B button will select whatever choice is highlighted by the blinking red arrow in Super Mario World's case. Each game will handle these kinds of visual cues in a unique way, but usually there will be some kind of pointer, cursor, or a visual distinction like bold highlighted text to help you understand what option or part of a menu you are currently selecting. You generally have 2 choices when it comes to save files: saving your progress, which often involves overwriting a previous save file with new progress made, and continuing or loading your existing save file. Modern games often save automatically for you as you make progress, but many also offer manual save files you can use to continue playing across multiple play sessions. You can play through an entire game just fine using a single save file, and in fact, many games restrict you to doing just that. But others allow you to freely have multiple save files, which allows you further flexibility in creating multiple points you can resume from as you play. If you are starting a new game in Super Mario World, you want to choose any Mario file that is shown as empty. Otherwise, if none of the 3 Mario save files are empty, it means all 3 save slots are being used for other game sessions, and you will need to use the Erase Data option to delete the progress on one of the save files in order to start a new game. Be careful when using this option, however, as there is no way to recover a deleted save file, and you will have no choice but to play through the game again if progress is accidentally lost. After choosing an empty Mario file, you are then asked to choose whether you want a 1-player or 2-player game. Super Mario World supports 2 players from the same console if you have a second controller, and each person takes turns playing, helping each other make progress. I'll be showing you a 1-player or single-player game in this video, but if you have a second controller, by all means try playing the game with a friend. Once you have decided on the number of players, the title screen transitions to the beginning of the game, where you are presented with a very brief story introduction. Since Super Mario World is more of an action-oriented game, there are only very brief story segments spread throughout the game to give you an idea of the overall narrative. Not all video games are this way, however, and some are very focused on narrative first, action second. It's just Super Mario World is not that sort of game, and instead focuses on the fun of playing in a more action-oriented way with little in the way of story. Next, you will be presented with the map screen. Sometimes these will be called World Map or Overworld, but the purpose of a map screen like this is to help transition players between one playable area of the game to the next. In Super Mario World's case, each area your character stops at on this map represents a level or a stage you can play. You can see the level's name at the top of the map screen as well. To get to a different area, simply use the D-pad to navigate your character along the available paths and press the B button to enter a stage. As you complete stages or levels, new pathways will appear, allowing you to access additional areas and progress through the game. Once you enter a level, the view will switch from an overhead perspective to a side view one. Here you will be presented with a number of visual elements. Each game will offer different kinds of features, but many of them share commonalities and conventions. In Super Mario World's case, let's go through each aspect of what you are seeing on the screen to help you become familiar with everything. In the top left corner, you will see the name Mario, or Luigi if you are player 2, and below that, an X followed by a number, in this case 5. This is a concept called a number of lives. Many games have this concept of multiple lives, and the basic idea behind it is you have however many number of lives that are shown to try again when you make mistakes and still be able to keep your progress you have made. If your lives run out, you will either have to start over from your last save point or from the beginning of the game if you have not made it far enough yet to save your progress to your file. For games that do not have save files, passwords, or similar features to facilitate continuing where you left off, losing all your lives means you have to start over from the beginning. To the right of the number of lives, you'll see a star indicator and a large number next to that. This is a feature that is exclusive to Super Mario World in particular and has to do with bonus points rewarded when completing a level. In the center of the top area of the screen is a large blue box that's currently empty. This is another feature that is exclusive to Super Mario World. We will discuss both of these exclusive features in a bit more detail later on in this video. But for now, let's move on to the next item shown on the screen. You will see the word time and a starting number of 300. This number will gradually count down to 0 while you are in each level. The number shown is seconds, so to put it simply, you have 5 minutes to complete each level before time runs out. If you do not finish a level in time, you will see a message letting you know that time ran out, and it will count as losing one of your lives. Time limits can be frustrating, especially when you are new to a game, but the idea behind it is to keep players moving actively through a level. At first, you may struggle against them, and it can feel like you don't have enough time to even complete a stage properly, but as you become more familiar and comfortable with playing a game like Super Mario World, the time limits on each stage will become less of an issue to deal with. The last items on the far right side of the top of the screen shows a golden coin with an X and a number next to it, and there is another number below that. The bottom number is a score counter. This is something that feels archaic in this day and age, and serves little purpose for most players today. But back when this game was new, the idea of getting some higher arbitrary score than other players on a given level was a way for some players to compete with one another if that was something that interested them. The much more important number is the one with the gold coin icon next to it. As the icon suggests, this is a counter for the number of coins you have collected during a level. It's a long-standing tradition, and has even become a convention, that when you collect 100 coins, you will be given an extra life, also called a 1-up. You will find many coins placed around each level, and collecting them is often to your benefit as you play. Once you reach 100 coins, the coin counter resets back to 0, letting you know how many more coins you need to collect in order to receive your next extra life. In most Mario games and other 2D platformer titles, your character will start on the left side of a level, and the goal to reach will be on the far opposite side. In other words, most 2D platformer games will have you moving your character from left to right as you make progress in a stage. There are some exceptions, with stages having more verticality to them, and some games allowing you to move freely in any direction, with a greater emphasis on exploration. But most 2D platformer games will primarily have you start on the left and move gradually towards the right. As players make their way through the level, there will be obstacles and enemies trying to bar your way and thwart any progress. Most 2D platformer games have rules to follow that you will gradually learn by playing, but let's explore the common rules of Super Mario World to give you a better idea of how it all works. The easiest one to learn is starting off the first level without touching any buttons on the controller. An enemy will come sliding at Mario from the slope up above and walk into him. By doing this, you quickly learn that coming into contact with an enemy in this way counts as a loss of a life, and you have to start the stage over again. From here, you may experiment with moving the D-pad, and noticing that Mario moves on the screen in the direction that you pressed. You may even try pressing the B button, and realizing that it allows Mario to jump up into the air. You could, for example, jump over the enemy as they approach. That way Mario does not come into contact with them from the front. If you try this, however, the enemy will turn around when they reach the end of the screen and bump into Mario from the back, which also counts as a loss of a life. And so, you may be inclined to try avoiding the enemy altogether by moving left and right and having Mario jump over them twice. This does work, and avoiding the enemy allows it to move off of the visible screen and disappear. This approach may even work for a while, but sooner or later you will reach a situation that cannot be solved in this way, and you will learn that avoiding all the enemies is not the intended way to play the game. Gradually in this way, primarily through trial and error, you will learn how things work in the game. Each platformer game has its own rules, but Mario games were one of the earliest, and so they set many conventions and standards for the genre. Many other games of a similar nature took inspiration from its ideas. As you explore the basic controls further, you will come to discover that in Super Mario World, you can move left and right with the D-pad, but you can also duck down by pressing down, or look up by pressing up on the D-pad too. In addition to just pressing a button, it is often necessary to hold a button down for a longer period of time in order to achieve a desired result as well. For example, if you quickly press the B button to make Mario jump, he will jump at a particular height on the screen. But if you hold down the B button for a slightly longer period instead, you'll notice that Mario jumps even higher than he did with just a quick press of the button. And this is just one example. If you try pressing some of the other face buttons, you will soon discover that the A button makes Mario do a spin jump instead of his normal jump. This is another feature that is unique to Super Mario World, and there are important differences between the rules of what a regular jump can do and what a spin jump can do. Spin jumps also reach greater heights when the A button is held down versus pressed. If you try jumping up onto the sloped platform where the enemy slid down from the start of the level, you will notice something else interesting that happens. Mario slides off the slope if you don't press any buttons. This is a sense of gravity and physics that has come into play. In order to climb that slope and reach the special coin at the top of it, you have to continue to move Mario to the right after landing on the slope platform to counteract its tendency to make Mario fall back down. If you have Mario jump at the height of the slope, you can collect the special coin, and you will notice that doing so adds a small golden coin icon next to Mario's name that was not there before. These special coins are collectibles that the game rewards the player for finding in each level. If you manage to collect 5 of these in the same level, it's the same as getting 100 coins, and will reward you with an extra life. As you move more to the right, you will notice the view of the screen follows Mario, and what you see will change. This will often hold surprises, as you never quite know what is coming up next. A common limitation to many platformer games is that once something has gone off the visible area of the screen, if you go back to it again, it reappears, sometimes unexpectedly, especially if you avoided the enemy. This is just in the nature of many platformer games, and is something you will have to get used to if you do any backtracking. You will encounter different types of enemies, and they have their own unique rules for how they work. This will also take trial and error, and experimentation in general, to understand them. In Mario games, you will also encounter the iconic question mark blocks. At first, you might not know what to do with these, or what their significance is. But with enough experimenting, you'll discover that if you jump into these blocks from underneath them, interesting things will happen. For example, a mushroom with eyes might pop out and start sliding across the ground. If you let that mushroom contact Mario, something else interesting will happen. It will grow larger. This is the earliest example of a collectible power-up item for Mario, in this case the Super Mushroom. Collecting power-ups like this gives players a distinct advantage, and the effects will vary depending on the type of power-up. Super Mushrooms make Mario grow larger in size, but they also provide an important benefit, which is making it so that if Mario comes into contact with an enemy, instead of losing a life, he'll shrink back down to normal size, and play continues without interruption. This means as long as Mario is not small, he can withstand one hit from an enemy. There are other features that go along with this as well, which we will discuss a bit later, but for now just remember that collecting power-ups like this for Mario is almost always a good idea. As you experiment further, you may come to discover that you can do something else besides just avoiding enemies too. As I mentioned earlier, avoiding all enemies is not the intended way to play a Mario game. Instead, if you press the B button and use the left and right buttons on the D-pad to maneuver jumping Mario in such a way that he is able to land on top of an enemy, you will notice that they are defeated, and the game will give you points for your total score to reward you. In other words, you have now discovered the primary intended way of making progress in a Mario game, jumping on top of enemies to defeat them. Almost immediately, you will begin to see challenges associated with this feature of the game, such as different enemy types that require you to jump on them twice before they will be completely defeated, or large enemies that are difficult to reach the tops of, and coming into contact from any of their sides or underneath them will still count as taking damage for a powered-up Mario, or losing life as a small Mario. There are even some enemies that Mario cannot safely jump on top of at all, and they must be defeated using some other method, or avoided entirely if they cannot be defeated easily. With this knowledge, you may experiment further. As you play, you'll uncover more depth and different layers to the gameplay experience. For example, holding down the B button when you land on top of an enemy will perform a higher jump, just like when you do similar when starting to jump from the ground. Or you might experiment with the spin jump by pressing the A button instead, and discover that it has different properties than the normal jump when landing on enemies too. For example, an enemy that normally takes 2 jumps to fully defeat might be defeated in a single spin jump. Or some enemies that will damage Mario if he jumps on them might be possible to land on safely with a spin jump. The more creative and imaginative you get with the different things you try, the more you will learn about the nuances of the game as you play, and the more rewarding the game will feel as you make progress. You will eventually encounter yellow blocks with eyes on them. If you jump into these from below, like with the question mark blocks, they will simply spin in place for a few seconds, allowing you to pass through them, before stopping and becoming solid blocks again. If you jump on them from above, they don't do much, and just act like a regular platform. You might even try spin jumping on them to see if anything different happens. If you are a small Mario, nothing will seem any different. However, if you spin jump on top of these yellow blocks when Mario is big and has a power-up, they will shatter completely. Armed with this knowledge, you can access certain areas of the game that seem to be blocked off, such as side areas that you can get through via pipes, for example. And speaking of pipes and side areas, this is a very common thing to find in Mario games. Players are often rewarded for finding hidden areas and secrets within a level. Not all pipes can be traveled through, but there is no visual distinction between the types that allow you to enter them in Super Mario World, so you have to experiment here too. To enter a pipe that is underneath Mario, press down on the D-pad while he is standing on it. To enter one that is above Mario's head, jump up to the entrance of it while holding up on the D-pad at the same time. Otherwise, if a pipe is positioned sideways, just have Mario walk into it for a few seconds and he will enter it. These hidden areas can often have great rewards. Some might be hiding the special coins to collect 5 of per level. Or you might find a green mushroom that looks like a red super mushroom, but instead is a 1-up mushroom, which instantly gives Mario an extra life as though you collected 100 coins. You may also find power-ups and numerous coins to collect in these areas too, and some might even be shortcuts, bypassing parts of the level and allowing you to progress through it more easily. If you have the time left on the clock to spare, it's usually helpful to enter any hidden areas and gather their rewards. Now at this point you might be wondering, how is someone supposed to just know all this stuff about the game? Do they really expect players to be mind readers or something? But not to worry. Throughout the game, you will find these purple and red boxes. If you jump into them from underneath, just like with a question mark box, a message will be displayed on the screen, and the game will pause for a few moments. These are tutorials or tips to help you learn about some of the things the game has, and how certain features work. They will often explain something that is coming up that you haven't encountered yet, to help you understand how to proceed. As you play, be sure to interact with these hint boxes, and you may need to practice a few times until you fully understand the features they are explaining. For example, the first of these, point of advice boxes, tells you about that blue box in the center of the screen, and how to use it. The blue box is essentially an item storage that lets you hold an extra power-up from Mario. For example, if you already have collected a Super Mushroom power-up, and Mario is big, and you collect a second Super Mushroom power-up without Mario getting hit by an enemy in the meanwhile, then you will see the Super Mushroom icon appear at the top of the screen. If you press the select button on the controller at any time, you can release an item from this storage box so that Mario can collect it. You can use this if Mario gets hit by an enemy and becomes small, for example, so that he will become big again quickly. However, you have to be careful with the timing, because you can miss collecting the item as it falls from the item storage box. So try to use it at a time when you can for sure reach it as it falls from the top of the screen. On some stages, you will see these small goalposts with a thin tape. If Mario crosses through these posts, the tape will be cut, and you will hear a chime sound. This is a checkpoint. Checkpoints are like temporary save points halfway through a stage. Rather than starting from the beginning of a level, once you have reached a checkpoint, if you lose a life, Mario will begin at the checkpoint instead. This is a great benefit for longer levels, or more challenging ones, that would prove very difficult to complete from start to finish in a single attempt. At this point, you may have also experimented with the other face buttons, Y and X, and wondered what exactly they do. Pressed on their own, they seem to do nothing. However, if you instead hold either one of them down while moving Mario left to right, after a while of holding down the X or Y button and moving in a single direction without stopping, you will begin to notice that Mario moves with greater speed, breaking into a run. Once you have gotten used to the basic controls of the game, you will gradually want to familiarize yourself with this feature as well, because it will allow you to progress through levels with greater speed, and more easily facilitate completing stages before time runs out. And here is another hint box with an explanation for an additional feature that the X and Y button has, carrying certain items with you. In this example, an empty shell is shown on the ground as something Mario can pick up if you are holding one of the two run buttons. If Mario is not holding X or Y when coming into contact with this shell, you will kick it forward in front of him instead, which is a completely different feature that can also come in handy at times, but not the desired functionality in this example. Holding Y or X and contacting the shell, you will notice Mario picks it up and will continue to hold onto it as long as you keep holding the run button, and you can even carry it with you as you continue on the stage. However, this example is teaching you that you can also direct the shell upwards and throw it, instead of just kicking it in front of Mario. To do this, you hold the up button on the D-pad while holding the shell, and then let go of the X or Y button, while still holding up on the D-pad. Mario will toss the shell straight above him, and when it lands back down, he will kick it away in front of him. If aimed correctly, the shell will fly up and hit the yellow block from underneath, just like as if Mario had jumped up that high and hit it underneath himself. But this yellow block is special, as it had a hidden item inside. Instead of just spinning in place like most yellow blocks will do, some of them will have secrets like this hidden as well. In this case, it's a green 1-up mushroom, and if you collect it before it enters the pitfall, Mario will gain an extra life. But if you happen to miss it, and your instinct is to follow it down, you will learn another common aspect of Mario games, which is most of the time, entering a pitfall means losing a life. After many trials and tribulations, and a considerable amount of experimentation and learning, you will reach the large goalposts that signify the end of a level. Simply crossing between these goalposts will see to it that Mario completes the level successfully, and a new area will become accessible on the world map. But if you can manage to cut the moving tape by jumping into it at the right time, Mario will earn bonus points for doing so, which will appear in the large number to the left of the item storage box. When this number reaches 100, just like with coins, it will reset back to 0, but will reward you with a bonus minigame that allows you to try for a chance to get multiple 1-up mushrooms. And so, as you continue to make progress, more areas will become available. In these, you will find new challenges and new features of the game. For example, some areas may take place underwater, where you'll learn that you can swim by pressing the jump button repeatedly. But to jump out of the water, you have to hold up on the D-pad. And you'll find new types of power-ups for Mario too, such as the Fire Flower, which allows Mario to throw fireballs at enemies by pressing the Y button, or spin jumping with the A button too. And you'll even find Yoshi, a dinosaur companion who helps Mario on his adventure. Once you make enough progress, you'll even reach the first castle stage, which introduces its own new mechanics, like a fence Mario can climb on, and even your first boss battle at the end. If you manage to defeat Iggy, the game will present you with a little bit more story, and tell you that you have completed World 1, and are on your way to the next major area, called Donut Land. It will also be at this point where the game asks you if you would like to save your progress to your save file. You can choose to either save your progress and continue playing, or continue playing without saving your progress. I would highly recommend that you save your progress every time you see this prompt, unless you have a specific reason for not doing so. Once you have saved your progress at this point, you can safely stop playing the game for a period of time of your choosing, and you will be able to resume where you left off at the start of World 2. In World 2, you will find other new surprises, including a new power-up, the Feather, which grants Mario the ability to fly with a cape if you combine running and jumping together. It takes a lot of practice to master, but is also the most rewarding power-up with the most depth to the gameplay that you will find in Super Mario World. This and many other surprises await you. Hopefully, after watching this video, you've been able to get a good sense of the basics for playing a Mario game, what to expect from a 2D platformer genre game in general, and you can feel confident about using a controller or gamepad to play too. When all is said and done, the most important part of playing a game is to have fun, so don't be afraid to experiment and try many different things. Games often reward players for their creativity and ingenuity, and the more you play, the more you will come to understand how a particular game works, and thus the more confident you will feel with playing through it successfully over time. Nobody started out being amazing at games on their very first try either, so don't feel discouraged if you're struggling a bit. If the game starts to feel frustrating, that means the fun has subsided, so I would recommend just taking a break and coming back to play it again later. With practice, you will improve and become more comfortable with playing, and you will overcome challenges that you once struggled with in good time. I hope you found this video helpful and that it encourages you to give something new a try that you may have been hesitant to engage with. And most of all, I hope you have fun. Thanks for watching this video in its entirety, and be sure to subscribe to my channel for more instructional gaming videos like this one. See you again soon.